Welcome everyone to today's episode of the Raise podcast. I am thrilled to welcome my friend and our customer, longtime customer, Chris Campbell, to today's show. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Brent. Excited to be here.
Real subtle orange throughout the Oklahoma State Foundation offices, and that is reflected in Chris's office. And the pride and passion you feel when you're walking through Oklahoma State is really unparalleled. I've been in a lot of advancement shops, and you guys literally wear it on your sleeve. So good to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit about Chris's background, career path, progression, and talk a little bit about innovation and the challenges and the opportunities around innovation in the advancement sector. Before we do that, I did want to share that Chris and I are both aspiring musicians. We are both trying to learn to play guitar, and in fact, we recently had some EverTrue guitar picks made, and they were somewhat inspired by Chris. So how's music going? What's new on the guitar front?
So, the last couple of days, I haven't been practicing as much. I started Stranger Things season 3. So I had to get through that. So my wife, when I finished the last, she said, "What are you going to do now?" So I'm going to start practicing guitar again. But I'm terrible at it. The EverTrue picks do help, but it's really something I enjoy. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been fun to talk with you on musician over that as well. So
yeah. So in the spirit of innovation, both Chris and I are using an app called Musician, which is almost like Guitar Hero meets lessons, and it's competitive, it's social. And we both are doing really poorly on that app right now. So, but reflective of digital transformations affecting even how music is taught. So, let's get into advancement. Let's get into why we're here today. You have come up the ranks with a long career. I mean, you haven't been out of school all that long yet. You've come up the ranks into a senior leadership position at Oklahoma State. Tell us a little bit about your career path. How did you end up in advancement? What age were you when you even heard or knew what the word advancement meant? I was probably 26 or something like that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that trajectory.
Well, I think there's a lot of great majors and a lot of great young people that are studying, fundraising, philanthropy, and it's exciting to see that. But a lot of the joke is, you kind of stumbled into it or you fell into it, and I'm kind of the same way. Oklahoma State University graduate, Management Information System in our Spear School of Business. Spent the first couple of years out of college in the private sector in IT, and just kind of on a whim had heard about a gig back at OSU, actually working with our athletic department. We were in the process of essentially rebuilding our football stadium, and just kind of applied for that job on a lark. And got it by some miracle, because I really didn't have a sales background. It was really more of a sales job. But so the way that was structured was we were the fundraising team for the athletic department. And so I've been a foundation employee, OSU Foundation employee, since the end of 2004. Did that for a couple of years, had a blast doing it, moved over to the business school where I graduated.
So as an Oklahoma State grad, a fan, and now selling that mission, what was your favorite memory in the athletic sales? Anything really stand out during that project, or people you met? Or
that's probably where I have my favorite stories, just because of what we were doing and the speed with which. But I have story. There's a story where it was a prospect that my boss didn't think was really a prospect. So I call him on a Tuesday afternoon, and he ends up doing a 6-figure gift over the phone so he can get floor seats in our in Gallagher Arena, our basketball arena. And my buddy Shane, that he and I have kind of grown up here together in the organization, we were both working athletics. This was like at 2:30 on like a Tuesday. Neither of us were married, had kids. It was like, we will hop in a car and drive up to Southwest Kansas right now to come pick up. You don't need to mail this check. Let us come get it from you. And he was such a nice guy. He would not he was like, "There's nothing out here. There's nothing to do. I'll send it to you FedEx." And sure enough, the very next day we had a pretty significant 6-figure check from a guy we knew nothing about prior in the mail in our hands. And so there's a few other stories where my boss tried to convince some people that I was like the backup quarterback, which, that's a stretch at best, but we'll save those for another conversation.
Very cool. And so you're able to do that over the phone?
Yeah. And, that was a kind of a referral, and just a great opportunity to get someone on board.
Very cool. Okay, so from the athletics work, really, you're selling the mission, you're doing the work, you had this IT background. What happens next?
So in athletics, was kind of ready. I was ready to kind of make the jump to kind of full-fledged fundraising. I think the joke in athletics is a little bit it's maybe not full-fledged philanthropic fundraising, because a lot of times you're selling seats or suites or tickets, but still a great way and a great place to learn about that. But jumped over to be a development officer for our business school, and I was kind of the number 2 there in our business school for a couple years, and just really frontline fundraiser, learned kind of the basics, the mechanics, a lot of cold calls, a lot of trying to build queries on my own in our donor database, and this was certainly well before we had a tool like EverTrue. Again, because my background's IT, I was a little better at that, and I could kind of self-serve there. So it allowed me to maybe to ramp up a little bit faster, but that was really kind of where I got into and learned kind of what it takes to be a fundraiser and to kind of do that work.
And from there, you're the gift officer writing their own queries. That's got to rub somebody the wrong way, but you did it anyway. And then where do you go from there?
Yeah, I think some the wrong way, some the right way, because it was work they didn't have to do, or there wasn't another list they had to generate for another development officer. But our vice president at that time, who was relatively new, had kind of recognized this marriage of me being a frontline fundraiser and having that experience, but also still having a very analytical and kind of pragmatic mind, and with kind of that IT, flair there. And she actually asked me to take over what was called development research at the time, with certainly no prior experience. It was a huge burgeoning department of me and one prospect researcher at the time. And this was really at the start of our last comprehensive campaign. And so we took over that group, development research, reworked it, grew the team, rebranded it prospect development, really created, prospect research and prospect management as, teams within that department as we grew, and went from myself and a prospect researcher to at one point in time had 9 or 10 people in all of prospect development.
And so if you were to say, because we hear a lot of job titles, we don't always think about the deeper meaning. Prospect research, development research has been around for a long time. What is the difference between that and prospect development? And I think even at EverTrue sometimes we probably use those expressions interchangeably. What's the difference?
And we do here too. We've had that team for 8 or 9 years, and people still call it prospect research. And I think for me, it's really more that it's as much the difference between prospect research and prospect management. Here for us, we've got folks that are really working on it's kind of micro versus macro is how I typically look at it. Micro on the prospect research side is really digging into a prospect, a potential prospect or a donor, to find out what we can about that person, to set our development staff up for whether it's a great introductory visit or even a solicitation. On the prospect management side, we've gotten, I think, really good at that too, where we're really partnering with the development officers to make sure they're working their portfolio, they're working their pipeline. Prospects aren't sitting stale in there for years at a time, and so that's a little bit of how we look at it. But we continue to push that and see how that's evolving, especially with some of these new tools we're getting access to.
And so it sounds like research, or the historical approach to research, is a little bit more reactive on the individual prospect level versus proactive on the overall portfolio.
100%. And these numbers, I had Jacob send me these, dovetail nicely with our implementation of EverTrue. So in our FY17, we did about 110 what we would call proactive referrals. These are referrals that we're finding ourselves, that the development officer's not coming to us and saying, hey, I need a profile. These are us giving fresh leads and fresh names. We did about 110 of those in FY17. We just wrapped up our FY19, and we were about 330, right? And so, to basically triple that number, and I would say 90 to 95% of those are coming from the EverTrue platform, because of the data that gets brought together and that we can marry with our own information. We knew, and when Jacob took over prospect development, last year, actually 2 years ago, the charge was we've got to be more proactive than reactive, and we're really seeing that shift.
One of the things that has always struck me about working with you all is you are very quantitative, and you're setting goals. Everybody has goals for development officers, or at least they should. But it seems like oftentimes in that prospect management, prospect research realm, the goals might not be as hard. You have really hard, and I mean firm, clear, quantitative goals. Going from 110 proactive referrals to 330 proactive referrals this year. And then obviously the question is, well, what happens with those referrals? And what is the pipeline that's created? And some of those might play out over 10 or 20 years, and some of those might play out on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:30, the way that you experienced in your athletic development days. So talk to me about the goal setting process around prospect development, prospect management. Is that common based on what you're seeing in the sector? Do you feel like you're on the front edge of that curve? I mean, if I surveyed your peer institutions, what percentage would even have proactive referral goals?
I would say it's probably not many. We've been very fortunate here. We've had leadership over the years here, our presidents, our VPs of development that have certainly understood the value of prospect development to an extent where they're not necessarily they're not asking us to justify ourselves with these metrics and these goals. It's really just giving us something to focus on and targets to shoot towards, right? But I'll say we've kind of struggled over the years with those. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'd say is make the case for your peers at other institutions, maybe who aren't doing, because I do think that there's just this difference between, are we a reactive organization or are we proactive? We're always going to be partially reactive because something triggers us to look up somebody, there's a wealth event, we have to go and do that research. But how do you make the case for starting a proactive program?
Well, it comes down to our ability to, you marry the prospect research side with the prospect management side. And when you see portfolios that are kind of languishing where you've got stale prospects in there, you've got to have that influx. You've got to have that opportunity. And it's a bit of a two-way street, because to be able to do the proactive piece, we actually have to cut back on the reactive piece, right? And so that was a deliberate conversation with the development leadership group and our development officers to say, hey, we're going to pull back on some of this stuff because we've created some self-service, functionality. But, the metric I typically use is, it's three suspects for one prospect and 3 prospects for, potentially 1 commitment. And so you're on a 9-to-1 ratio there. That number explodes pretty fast when you do the math. And if you're asking a development officer to make 12 to 18 major gift asks a year, you know where you've got to be. And so they need all the help they can get, and they do realize that. But you've got to sell that prospect a little bit too on those proactive referrals. I mean, you've got to have a nugget in there, because clearly our prospect researcher saw something on that prospect that made them go, yeah, this is someone I need to send out. We've got to sell that piece to the development officer so that it's getting over that hump to just make that phone call or get out of their chair and go visit that person. That typically is the bigger struggle.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a segue into some of what we had a little pre-call where we were previewing some of our upcoming work at the intersection of data, interests, really dynamically updating CRM in a way that hasn't happened before in the sector. And I think one of the things that really struck me about that conversation was just your focus on interests and passions. I think that there's in the reactive world that many of us are used to, it was all about, let me do my wealth screening, let me look at capacity, and let me do cold outreach to eventually find out what they're interested in. And I think in the era of big data and social analytics and lead generation that we're now living in, we can start with interests and passions and then qualify for capacity and then make a next step. And that's really a huge leap. It sounds simple, but structurally that's a big leap from doing the screening and then assigning portfolios. You live the world of the cold portfolio, and I think a lot of what I'm hearing you say and what we've observed is, how do we make sure that those names are as warm as possible with as much context as possible to be able to quickly either move forward or disqualify?
Yeah, and some of this is, a lot of it is really efficiency. You can talk about efficiency with a development officer to say who to call, who not to call, who to prioritize before another. But when you start thinking about passions and some of the opportunities we have here, we're going to launch here before too long a focused scholarship campaign. We have 450,000 plus constituents in our system. Not that everybody is not important, but how do we focus on those folks that have a passion for scholarships so that we could start with those prospects first and create a greater amount of organizational efficiency here. Not to say that facilities or faculty support is not critically important, but you look at it, there's this micro and this macro opportunity across the board, and it's not just for an individual development officer or annual giving, it's for the organization. But using those passion points, because again, we as a fundraiser who spent time in a unit-based, college shop for the business school, I'm going in talking to people that are most likely business grads that I'm going to talk about the business school with, and that's just not the approach, right?
Absolutely. And so, on that note, when you think about how the data and technology landscape has evolved, given your background on both the technology side, but also as a development officer, and just as a consumer, right? I mean, using Musician today would not have been possible 10 years ago to try to learn guitar. We're obviously trying to activate some of those same trends via our work at EverTrue. What is it like to be in your shoes in such a rapidly shifting technology landscape where in many cases you need to make investment decisions for systems that could last 10 or 20 years? How do you do that? How do you think about it? And I know you and your colleagues, we've gotten to know Jimmy and your team and others, you've been really thoughtful and diligent about trying to research the space as much as possible, but it still seems like there's so much change both within the advancement sector and then externally. Where's your head at on just sort of the status quo of the sort of technology strategy landscape?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. I mean, for us, and I think we're in a world now where there's so much technology, there's so many organizations out there. You kind of just have to pick something and just kind of dive in with a little bit of faith and a little bit of hope. You gotta prove the case a little bit first. I mean, the two examples I give really quickly, certainly EverTrue, we've got 75 users now. We started with 10 or 12 though to kind of make the case, right? And it was pretty easy to make that case once we got in with 10 or 12. We have a visualization platform here that's not specific to our industry. Same thing there. I kind of went out on my own and bought a license by myself and did a few things and showed it to our VP of development. And now we have, 12 or 14 power users and 130, end users for that platform. You gotta kind of find where your opportunities are and I don't know, just start somewhere. But yeah, you and I have talked a lot about this. Certainly the CRM landscape, the technology landscape to advancement, and you guys at EverTrue with this philosophy of bringing the for-profit, capabilities, thought process into advancement, into the not-for-profit world. That's where we've got to be, right? I mean, and it's as much about our ability to do what we need to do, but also meeting the expectations of our end users, right? Because every one of our folks has an Android phone or an iPhone, and they expect our giving page to be just as easy to use, just as pretty, just as efficient, and that truly is a struggle. So now, when we have partners like EverTrue that are building those things out, you're looking for those opportunities to enhance what you're doing, but also kind of add to the value of what of where you're kind of lacking. And so, on the CRM front, that's I think we're really again at the forefront here a little bit with these stepping into these modern CRMs. Those have been out there for many years now in the for-profit industry, but to see some of these entities pop up, certainly EverTrue, but others that are building these out is really, really exciting. We're definitely, I think, certainly leading edge, if not bleeding edge there on some of those things. But, I've been telling my boss, the president here at the foundation, that, the conversation is there's some decisions out there, and you can make a decision for the next 3 to 5 years, or you can make a decision for the next 10 years, right? And where do we want to be? Because neither one of those is a right or wrong answer. But it's really assessing, part of that, I think we have an organization here that's no organization is 100% change ready, but I think we're more change ready than most. And so, again, I tend to be the person that says, hey, let's turn on Microsoft Teams. Let's start lighting that up and see who gravitates towards it and see what we do with it. I joke that I use kind of an organic approach, which is my organic approach, but it's kind of my code word for I just didn't have a plan. But that's typically how that works.
Yeah, I think we've been hearing a common conversation around teams testing Slack or Microsoft Teams and having more collaboration and getting out of I got to send an attachment to 10 people with an email every single time, and really being able to streamline communication. When you say that you're change ready, I literally had a conversation with somebody yesterday who said, my team is sort of getting whiplash from change. We've had too much change, but they need more change. And so why do you feel like you're change ready? What does that even mean? Any lessons that you might want to impart on your peers who are listening?
Yeah, so they are somewhat more change ready because of, I think the term used is change, about a whiplash, because we keep bringing things online. And really in the last 4 to 6 months, I've gotten feedback from my peers and leadership team that, there's a lot of stuff we're turning on and lighting up. And, one of the ways we've addressed that is just very tangibly. We created, and actually she just celebrated her 1-year anniversary as of July 1, a new role last July 1, technical training and process improvement manager. And it's a staff member that's in information strategy in our area, and she focuses on training for our technical tools, right? And we have just seen a night and day change in kind of our end users' openness and certainly understanding of these tools. And so not every organization has those resources, but we certainly felt strongly that, obviously going into an implementation here in the next, probably 12 to 18 months, we had to have somebody in that position that could really help us with that. And now granted, her background is in that. She's been in our technical team, so she understands our environment. She knows how to train people. I would say that's probably been one of the biggest, certainly in the last year, opportunities for us where we've seen the greatest growth and support from the organization because they have that person. And the joke now is we should write a jingle. It's just call Bonnie, right? Because she's the person. Just pick up the phone and call her if you got a question. And it's been fantastic.
Chris, I am committing right now, if you'd like to co-write a jingle called Just Call Bonnie.
Let's do it.
I'm down to give that a shot.
Get some cowboy chords going and we'll yeah, absolutely, I'm on it.
We're going to make that a follow-up coming out of today's conversation. I think Bonnie's really going to appreciate it. But I think it's a great point, which is something we deal with all the time. It is one thing to go in and have an exciting presentation with a prospective EverTrue customer to be able to identify real challenges, whether it's mobile access or incomplete data or challenging collaboration, and then to be able to do a demo that shows a solution that we know works, okay? We know that it can work really well, and then not to have it embraced and used at its fullest capacity. And I think that we're constantly trying to come up with ways that we can be more hands-on from a service perspective to really provide some of that technical training and coaching, but we can never be, in our current role, an insider the way that Bonnie can be, somebody who can probably literally roam the halls and help people out and do coaching and training, and for all the help videos and documentation and support that we can provide as a vendor partner, it is invaluable to us and to partners like you to have that internal ownership to help maximize your return on investment, to be able to go from 110 proactive referrals to 330 proactive referrals. Those are the metrics we want to be able to speak to for every single one of our customers, not usage reports or how many people access the platform. I get that that's a leading indicator, but I want to know about results. And I don't just want to know proactive referrals, I want to know pipeline, proposals, revenue closed, and I know that we're going to be able to get there as we continue to advance.
And not to turn this into a commercial for EverTrue, but Maggie has just been you guys have been our model for this customer success model of an organization. She's been with us every step of the way, asking us questions, because with Bonnie as well and with Maggie, you have to meet people where they're at, right? A group training session is great when you're starting to build change management and train for tools, but everybody's use case is a little bit different until you can kind of meet them where they're at. So Maggie does that with us. She hears where we're doing and what we're doing and how we're doing it and helps us apply that. And I think that's a great opportunity for us. And again, the other piece here, there's a little bit of a benefit. We're competing with the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons, right? But there is a little bit of a benefit to that too when you think about change management, because we all have, phones with kind of the app ecosystem on it, right? And you may go to bed on Monday night and on Tuesday morning wake up and this app you've used every day, whether it's, Facebook or whatever it is, could be drastically changed, or the icons are over here, they're different. So to that end, I think people maybe are a little bit more open to change and understand that that's kind of the world we live in. So, hope is not a strategy is what I always say, but my hope is that that's helping us as we start to jump into these more modern technologies. And we work with platforms like EverTrue where you're lighting up new functionality, and there's no way for us to keep up with that. When you add that enrichment tab, just click the tab and look at it, right? I mean, we shouldn't have to put together an hour, training session here internally for someone to kind of figure out how to use that. It needs to make sense. It needs to be intuitive, of course, but I think that's just the world we live in, whether it's in our organizations or in our daily lives and the personal tools we use.
I think that's a good segue to next conversation. We are releasing a new part of our platform called TrueView, which is the first dynamically updating donor profile. Instead of one-off data appends, we want to be able to look at the 450,000 Oklahoma State constituents and that data, who they are. It's constantly changing in the background. You can't get at all of that information, but it is possible to get at more of it than ever before. And so we are investing in biographic updates, career updates, interest updates, and in allowing ongoing improvements to that data, new sources. And so Chris has been participating in that beta. It's very early, but I think that the punchline is it is becoming more and more possible to get at donor interests much more quickly based on digital behavior, based on purchasing behavior. So instead of guessing what people are interested in or using all that discovery officer time to try to qualify their interests, you can start with their interests and then figure out if there's a philanthropic potential. And so we just were reviewing a little bit of that earlier today. But when you think about some of what we talked about, when you think about the ability to get at some of those really micro interests, you were just sharing some of the specific problem areas on campus. We had not planned this, but just the really specific programs or funding needs that are just not easy to query the database and come up with a list for, that can be big drains on time that perhaps can be accelerated through some of what we've been discussing with TrueView. So we'd love some real-time examples of just specific funding priorities that are hard to attack in the absence of some of the big data potential we've been talking about.
Absolutely, and it's not just these kind of specific, maybe potentially smaller opportunities, but for us, an organization, we're going to launch a brand new the McKnight Center for Performing Arts. This is a $70 million building. We've never had anything like this before in Stillwater at OSU. Well, when we were asked to start fundraising for this 5 years ago, we didn't have any previous donors, right? Like there was no funds for this. We didn't have certainly a history of performing arts support here really at that level at the university. And so, it's not hard to find people who are passionate about the performing arts, right? And so with tools like this now, and to be able to, for something that big, I mean, that was a huge, near 9-figure type opportunity. You talk about our ability to really hone in and provide a great list of leads to the multiple development officers going out and fundraising on the behalf of that project. But then we've got some great one-off programs here. Our first cowgirl, Ann Hargis, who is President Hargis's wife, has been just as instrumental.
The first cowgirl.
First cowgirl, yeah, she's the first cowgirl, right? So
just to make it clear for everybody, that is the spouse of the president.
Correct, yeah. Ann is President Burns Hargis's wife, and he affectionately refers to her as the first cowgirl, and I think that moniker will certainly stick. But she's really passionate about certainly health. We've got one of the healthiest campuses in the country, but she's also got a program that she started called Pete's Pet Posse. So Pistol Pete is our mascot because we're the cowboys and cowgirls, but Pete's Pet Posse is really kind of a service animal program, and so it's pretty intense. I mean, you've got to go through it. It's a multiple week process, but she's really passionate about that. And while I think there's some great opportunity there, it may not be something we can dedicate a full-time fundraiser to or a full-time headcount. But she has great connections. She knows lots of great people. If we can really, really easily provide her a list of people that we've identified, because because of interests, through EverTrue, that have supported, the Humane Society or have a passion for dogs or service animals. That the time to from figuring out how we're going to support that and maybe grow that program has just shrunk, significantly. And our ability to give her a list of names that even she could call to say, hey, I understand you might have a passion in this area. Let me tell you a little bit about this program that I'm passionate about. And it makes that process so much smoother.
Yeah, no, I think we are moving out of capacity first discovery into interest first discovery. And it is not just technology that enables that. And I do appreciate the kind words you've shared about us, but it's not just the technology. It is having a strategy that even starts with caring about what people are interested in, having a communications and content strategy that is focused on sharing relevant stories, relevant photos, relevant videos that allow people to self-identify, and then having a prospect development system in place where there are people standing by waiting to not only understand engagement, add the capacity layers, get it into discovery portfolios, and then make sure that those visits are being had. And I think that is a model that is still early. I really do believe Oklahoma State's at the forefront of it. It sounds so simple. Why is it so hard for the industry to get there?
Because we haven't had the tools, right? I mean,
yeah, maybe it's part tools, but how do we make sure that we're not letting our existing systems drive our strategy, but instead try to set our strategy and then build the technology stack that supports it?
Well, it's about, and it kind of comes down at the organizational level here, about embracing, these new opportunities, these new tools, this new perspective of really focus, here at a university, a very tried and true model, education, not thinking first about the college from which you graduated, engineering school, because our teams are structured here to really support these colleges. And, if you've got to report to the dean every week on what's going on, so we've got to embrace kind of this holistic perspective of how we're engaging our prospects and donors. We've got to educate faculty and staff and our internal folks here that, if you can really get someone passionate about, more than just one specific thing, you can really open the doors to greater giving and a larger amount of giving. And at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. And, we've told this story dozens of times, but this McKnight Center, right? We didn't really have a great base. So what did we start doing? We started posting to Facebook, right? The announcement about the McKnight Center. And, this is 2 and 3 years ago that, the 2 years ago, I think the lead gift came from the McKnights. And Jacob, it didn't take long for him to go, well, let me pull that list of who those people were that have been engaging with that post. And then I'm going to start sharing with those development officers. And that it's a pretty simple process once you really think about it. But, we also have to think from the mindset, and we try to do this here as an organization, but everyone here is a fundraiser. You may not have it in your title. You may not be out meeting with prospects and donors. Everybody here is a fundraiser. And a great example, the social media manager we had at the time when we were launching McKnight Center, this was the conversation I had with him. I said, you're a fundraiser. We need to be pushing out content here, certainly from the foundation, but also with our partners across the street on campus, that allows us to engage with the right people for the right projects we're wanting to fund and support. And so that to see that kind of light bulb go off that's a really exciting thing, because we're all fundraisers here in some form or fashion.
Well, and I think that we are going to see the same shift in the communications realm that you've witnessed and been a part of in the evolution from prospect research to prospect development, prospect management, reactive to proactive. The same evolution has happened in the for-profit world as it relates to social media content communications. It is starting to happen in advancement. The social media person could be your number one source of major gift pipeline if activated in the right way and if aligned with a prospect development team. And when we go around the country and meet different leaders, it is not common for the social media team and the prospect development team, if there is one, to collaborate. And when you can get that collaboration going, that's when you can really build that referral engine to the front line.
And it's just, we talked about this, the TrueView, right? I mean, I think the example I mentioned earlier before we started the video was, how great, I used to sit as a development officer, in my car, my rental car in Dallas or wherever I was, with that printed off profile of that prospect, so I could kind of go, okay, accounting grad, 72, here's maybe some areas they've given to. Imagine being able to do that right on your device, your phone, your iPad, before you go on that call. And as you're starting to open the door, you see that they've liked the McKnight Center post, or the fact that a Pete's Pet Posse page, right? And to be able, as a development officer, because you've got to be adaptable and flexible on the fly, to walk, you may have gone in there with some preconceived idea of what that prospect might be interested in, but now you've got another thing to grab onto, right? And that becomes a really, really powerful tool, and really timely, of course.
You just wrote a script for a commercial that we should film that involves you in a rental car in Dallas and a printout of a donor profile, and ends with where we are today, where we are really starting to get to, which is having great information at your fingertips, having dynamic real-time updates, being able to understand interests. And doesn't mean it's the only thing they're interested in, and that you still need human qualification and real conversations to advance the discussion, but being able to have a strong starting point is key. And so, on that note, as we kind of zoom out a little bit, when you think about advancement, when you think about Oklahoma State, when you think about higher ed, the headlines, there's a lot of pressure right now on multiple fronts, and I think more responsibility than ever, especially in public institutions, for philanthropy to help fill gaps that seem to be appearing more and more acutely every day. What's your view of advancement? What's your view of higher ed? Take away technology, data, all of this. What is the conversation that is being had at Oklahoma State right now when you think about your role in the state and on the national landscape?
Yeah, loaded question. I mean, it's certainly for us, and not that it's not impactful for everybody. You're right. As a public institution, or supporting a public institution, and seeing that state funding start to go down, we hope that continues to build the case for the need for us here. And it actually, some of the things we talk about often takes us a little bit out of advancement. And I've had this conversation a lot recently of, we've done some things over the years here that may not necessarily be the true north of the foundation, or strictly in the fundraising context. But, because we're, at least here, we're a separate entity and we've got great resources, we can do some things that help raise the profile of the university and support the university. But, the biggest challenge is, the higher ed is that kind of tried and true institution, and really trying to bring this kind of innovative for-profit perspective in our institution here certainly has been a struggle. But the proof is in the pudding, and finding and using these tools to help. If our deans see that our development officers are more successful and more efficient, that's a big part of the ability to turn that on for us and move forward. But there's a great TED Talk, a guy by the name of Dan Pilata, that I've watched a couple of times over the years, and I would say this is something that I think about not just for advancement or higher ed, but certainly for nonprofits. And a big part of that talk really is, not focusing so much on, the cost to raise a dollar, right? You need to be aware of that. Don't get me wrong, especially as nonprofits, and being great stewards of the resources we've been given. But, I think that the question he asked in there, would you pay 50 cents on the dollar, knowing that 12 or 15 cents is probably a targeted cost to raise a dollar? Would you pay 50 cents on the dollar to cure cancer? And I think a lot of us would say, yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair trade-off, and not living in that bubble of trying to be as lean as possible, because that you can't really be that lean and be make change at that level we need to, and be transformative. And it takes resources and people that are willing to take those challenges and be innovative. And sometimes that takes a little more resources. And so I think for me, I know that's a big part of it. And we've been lucky here for the most part to be able to step out and grab some resources. But there's of course more that we want to be doing, that we could be doing. But we talk about donors, and they're it's kind of investment philanthropy, right? And you've got to put in some resources to get a return on an investment. And I think we're going that way, where people understand that we can't just be 7 cents on the dollar to really do great things and do those in innovative ways. So I think that's changing a little bit, but I'd love to see that change a little bit faster. And it's not about doing away with that understanding of the cost to raise a dollar. Your board doesn't necessarily want to hear that, but we also want to do great things in great ways.
Yeah, look, I think the question is, when you have 450,000 constituents, okay, with our current construct, how many are actively managed? Probably less than 1%, right? Let's just be, well less than 1%. If you could manage 2% or 3% or 4%, that would require new technology, new people, new roles, and so forth. But if it allows you to scale the impact that you can have for the state of Oklahoma or your student population more broadly, that's a conversation that I think is worth having. Do you feel like some of the challenges, the macro challenges around higher ed, student loan crisis, some of the pressures around state funding, does that actually create maybe a better environment to be more innovative? I mean, does it create, I don't want to say desperation, but maybe a little bit of desperation, not necessarily at Oklahoma State, but when you think about your peers in the industry and you think about the higher ed landscape in 2019 versus 15 years ago when you first got started, does it feel different now?
I think it does. I mean, it has to, because the resources continue to decline, right? And certainly with the Great Recession, we saw that kind of drop even faster. In some places, it's ticking back up to potentially 2000 or pre-2007, 2008 levels, but selfishly, it does create a business case for the need for fundraising. Unfortunately, it's so great, and the need is it expands even beyond. And I think I touched on this a second ago. Fundraising, it's like we put on a TEDx here for a couple of years. The foundation did. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily our true north, but our university didn't have the resources or the time or the energy to do that. And so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because they just, and I think we're probably not the only, private foundation that supports a university. A lot of times the folks on campus think that we just have all these resources. And while we are very fortunate, we do have some great resources, it's not enough to do everything that needs to be done. And so, again, sometimes that eats into what really is our true north, our ability to do great fundraising for the university, and you start to tack on some of these other things, and it's that, I think, death by 1,000 cuts is the saying, where you wake up one day and it's like, 40% of your time was spent fundraising. And as a fundraiser in the business school, my office when I was in the business school was actually in the actual business school, right? Well, they moved us all out of the colleges because I had to chaperone, a scholarship trip one time, which is really not fundraising, right? It's that other duties as assigned. And so really being able to hone in and focus on what we're here to do, it can be more challenging because there's so many things that need to be done that just, the campus doesn't have those resources.
I think as we conclude today, I did want to ask you a little bit just around the importance of mentorship in your career path. When you think about mentors or advice you might have for folks that are listening today that aspire to be in leadership positions, sounds like you've benefited a bunch from getting exposure to many different parts of an advancement shop, which I think allows you to think more holistically about how we're trying to build for the future. But do you have any mentors maybe you want to give shout outs to, or when you think about peers at other advancement shops who you rely on or really respect, anybody come to mind?
Yeah, and we've been, I'm always a bit apologetic because my career in fundraising advancement has been all here at OSU, right? So it's kind of sheltered. The good news, bad news, we are in a business, in an industry where there is some turnover. So we've had great folks come through the shop over the years, and I've stayed connected to a lot of those. A guy by the name of David Loyce was here for a couple years, went to Rice, and is now doing some things on his own. Ken Sigmund was our vice president of development for several years that I learned a ton from, and it's certainly finding the people in your shop that are because not everybody is necessarily great at everything, but really picking out the folks that are great at some of the things you feel like you need to get good at. There's a self-awareness piece there of going, okay, what do I need to get better at to get to whatever place I want to go, and really seeking out and finding people that are good at those things. But I'm here in my office. We're big into Strengths Finder here, and it's like learner and input are like my top two. So I'm always asking questions. I'm always trying to figure things out. I'm always learning things like the guitar, things like that, because that's what really motivates me. And I think that's been a benefit because I like to ask questions and learn how things work and what people's perspectives are, and just those conversations have been really invaluable to me over the years. Being willing to listen. The joke is, God gave you 2 ears and a mouth, and you're supposed to use them, in that same ratio. So I struggle with that at times, but it's been fun to be here in a place where, and quite frankly, when I got here in 2004, we were a much smaller shop, and we've really grown up over the last 10 or 15 years, and I've been able to do that with the organization. And so I've certainly done some things, we've certainly done some things that probably weren't best practices at the time, but you can learn a lot by not doing something the right way. So I think I certainly have benefited from that myself, but it's been fun. You and I talk quite a bit, Brent. It's just great to get out and hear different perspectives and people that are passionate about the industry in which we work. We talk to, because of some of our CRM conversations, we talked to Mark Koenig out at Oregon State, who's an incredibly smart guy, and we've learned a lot from. Actually, grew up here in Oklahoma, which I found out, and this is such a great, I say business, but it's a great industry to work in, because people don't do this that are not altruistic, right? They have a passion for serving the greater good. People are, and the other thing too is I've found over the years, and we do this all the time, we're not really, we're competing for philanthropic dollars, I get it, but we're not really competing each other the way Coke and Pepsi are competing, right? So people are open books. They'll share with you anything you want them to share with you, and it's a great way to learn and improve upon the way things are happening. And so like I said at the start, I really kind of stumbled into this industry, this business. I came here because I was an OSU grad and I thought it would be a fun job, but I'm here 15 years later because I believe in, certainly the mission of higher education. Oklahoma State University is a land grant. We still have so many first-generation college kids, or kids that come here to college. It's really easy to get up in the morning and serve that kind of cause, and so it's just been a lot of fun. We've certainly had our challenges over the years, but we've learned a lot along the way. And as we watch organizations like EverTrue and see Salesforce, right, get into this space, it's really, really exciting to see that kind of investment.
That's a segue to my last question, which is, we've got an audience of advancement professionals who are listening today. Make the case for Stillwater. You sort of just did, but are you hiring? Are you growing? Should somebody Google your jobs page right now? Why don't you do your best Oklahoma State commercial? I think it's been pretty good so far, but any exciting moments in time that folks should be really focused on?
Well, I'm obviously very biased. So not only did I go to school, I actually grew up here in Stillwater. So this is my hometown. So I'm very partial to the community. It's a great college town. We're doing great things here at the foundation. This place has been so much fun to be a part of because the way we typically phrase it is we take very seriously the work we do here, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. We like to joke around and have a good time. We all spend way too much time at work, right, to not enjoy it a little bit. And so I think the other day we were doing a presentation and just teasing people and having a good time. We've got that kind of environment here, but we're always hiring. We have open positions now. We may, I don't know if we'll have to cut this later, but, and it's not our current foundation president, who's been here 15 years, has announced that he's retiring. So we'll be hiring for that position here very soon and hopefully very quickly. So that would be a great opportunity for an aspiring advancement leader out there to come and lead a 150 person shop that's raising 15 years ago we were probably raising $50 to $60 million a year. Right now we're hitting 130 to 150 depending on how many big 8-figure plus gifts we're getting. But there's a lot of great opportunity here. Burns Hargis, who's been our president here the last 12 years, And Brent, you've been here, but even the campus physically has been transformed since he's been here. New buildings, a new business building. It's just, we say this a lot here. It's a great time to be a cowboy. We over the weekend, Matt Wolf, in his third or fourth professional start, won his first PGA Tour event. Was like the fourth youngest person to ever do that. We had A.D. Franch, who was a cowgirl soccer player here a few years ago. She was on the women's World Cup team. And there's one other that I'm forgetting, but Isaac Likely, who's a point guard on our basketball team, was on the under-19 FIFA basketball, won gold in that, and so it's fun to see a lot of that stuff going on. It's Saturdays in the fall are a lot of fun too. You get to sit around and hang out with your 60,000 of your best friends here at Boone Pickens Stadium and watch a pretty good football team too. So
good stuff.
Did I sell it enough?
Yeah, I'm sold. I mean, I want to come back. I will say it can be a hot place to go for a run once in a while. I wasn't ready for that on my last trip there, but I will be better prepared next time. And I think
it's a little toasty this time of year, yeah.
In conclusion, it is very easy to just do the same old thing. And I think depending on the culture and the context, there isn't always incentive to try to really push the envelope, push the boundaries. Entrepreneurs in this sector, myself included, EverTrue included, but other companies and emerging vendors that are out there need institutions that are willing to try something new, willing to take a little bit of a risk. And so for that, we thank you, and we look forward to continuing to push the boundaries. Any concluding thoughts? Otherwise, we will wrap.
Well, and just the kind of the parting shot here is, I know you and I are talking about the things we're doing here, but I am such a small part of that success. I've got a team of people, certainly peers here, but really in information strategy, the area that I oversee. And there's times when they should, but I very rarely hear no. There's a great group of folks on our team here that always find a way to rise to the occasion or the challenge or this crazy idea that I might have. And so when you come to them and say, we're going to try this new platform called EverTrue, I almost never get this no. They're always willing to try some. And so that speaks to our kind of our organizational culture here. But it's a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed watching you all at EverTrue certainly grow up. And we're excited to see how you all are pushing our industry forward, because we need more of that for-profit, hey, we don't need to do this the same way we've done this the last 20 years mentality, and it's exciting to see that. So
great stuff. Thanks for coming on the journey, Chris. And for everybody listening, please subscribe on iTunes or your podcast of choice. We're going to continue to have great conversations with folks like Chris in the coming months, and it's just been a really fun way for us to get to learn and shape our perspective on the sector, the challenges, the opportunities. And so without further ado, we're going to sign off from today's Raise podcast. Thanks.